Hello and welcome to Piece of Pod, a podcast brought to you by South Coast law firm Warner Goodman. I'm Sarah Whitemore. I'm an employment lawyer and senior partner in the firm with over 30 years of experience. In this podcast, I'll be having conversations with law firm partners, business owners, clients and other contacts of mine, and we'll be engaging in conversations about running businesses, career journeys, and how to excel in the world of work. So if that's of interest, why not grab yourself a cuppa, get yourself comfortable, and let's dive in. I'm joined today by Christina Dolding. She's from a company called The Colleague, and she's a colleague experience expert and a customer experience expert. And she's somebody that I've met through a networking group called Hampshire Business Networking. And we've talked together on numerous occasions about all sorts of things. And it's just fascinating what you do for a living. So thank you very much for agreeing to come on the podcast today.
Oh, you're more than welcome.
So a customer experience expert, a colleague experience expert, is that what you told the careers officer at school you wanted to be?
No, I didn't have a clue. And when they did my profile at school back in the day, they said I should have been a shepherdess.
Oh.
So that went a bit wrong. No, it wasn't. I wanted to work in the field of marine biology. I went off and did a marine biology degree, finished that, and I really had a dream of working with whales and dolphins, but life got in the way of that. So that didn't happen. So that's now my passion outside of work.
And outside of work, in your passion, have you actually seen and experienced whales, dolphins, swum with dolphins?
Yeah, so I've been over to Mexico to see some whales in the wild, and I've been to the Galapagos, and I've been swimming in the wild with dolphins. You're not really supposed to get in the water with them. So yeah, and I'm hoping to see manta rays next year in the wild. But that's my big passion outside of this.
I've only ever been, I was telling some colleagues this only today, I've only ever been on one dolphin boat trip. It ended in disaster. Let's just say there were lots of sick bags involved, lots of choppy water and no dolphins. So tell us a bit about your career journey then. So you left school, you went off and did your marine biology. How did that then bring you to customer and colleague experiences?
I think I've always been conscious of receiving an experience. So whether that's from parents, story for another day, schools, relations, friends, I've always been conscious of how that made me feel. So when marine biology wasn't the route for me, I ended up going into retail, which is a very kind of good place to start from an experience point of view. I didn't enjoy working at the weekends, established that quite quickly, and then I ended up working in a financial services company. Back in the day, there was a lot of temp work going on in financial services because the government were denationalising everything, and she said life's too short to be in a job you don't enjoy. So I just went over, thought I'll tempt, I'll see what I want to do, got offered a job there. Then they realised I was married, I was only 22, and they said, maybe not, you're going to get overlooked because you're married. It's like, that's quite interesting.
It is interesting. I often tell people a story about my situation. So my grandmother, so we're only talking a couple of generations ago, my grandmother was told she wanted to be an architect, and she was told you can't be an architect because girls don't go to university. So then my mother did go to university, so that was progress, and she did a chemistry degree and she became a teacher. And then when she got married, she was told you can't be a teacher anymore because you're married and your mind won't be on the job. I went to university. I think I've done fairly well. My girls, I now look at the generation coming behind me, they've got any choice they want to do. Nobody would ever dream of saying, because you're married, what might happen, or because you're not married, what might happen. I suppose that was the thing back in the day as well.
Absolutely. And there was only a couple of times where I think being female in the workplace, that was one of them. So I left because I thought, well, I can choose to get angry or do something about it. Left, joined another thing. And over the years, I kind of became very good at doing customer experience. Before it's a thing now, it's a proper science, proper methodology. When I started, it wasn't. It was just, it was something you could use to make whatever area you were working in better. But over the years, I kind of progressed into more formal roles in the customer space, account management space, and then ran a central customer experience consultancy within a larger business, which was amazing, and I probably loved that as much as I've ever loved any job. That was really nice, helping other parts of the business to understand what their customers, internal customers and external customers thought of them. And then I took that and then did a couple of roles at a more senior level, trying to transform businesses that weren't in the best of shape from a cultural, people, customer perspective. But then anybody that's in customer experience will tell you sometimes it's like pushing water uphill. Not everybody gets it. It's not on the top of everybody's list. Colleague experience generally further down the list. So I thought, wouldn't it be great to go and work with organisations that actually want to do this, and life will be happy, and I won't constantly be banging the drum. I got feedback once to say that I was a customer terrorist, using guerrilla warfare tactics to get to get my own way, and it was never my own way. It was always about the customer, but sometimes it could be perceived as potentially something that it wasn't. So so I decided about 18 months ago to leave that behind and take all the learning and wonderful things that that I did there, and the people that I met there, and actually turn that into something which hopefully other organisations can benefit from.
So when you're thinking about your sort of career milestones, if you like, you talk about moving from retail to financial services, and you talk about moving from a company that was prepared to discriminate against you because you were married. Those are both employee experiences, aren't they? Those are both colleague experiences, and those colleague experiences sort of drove your career into a different direction or moved you on. So sometimes the colleague experiences are negative ones like that. And I guess also sometimes colleague experiences are very positive ones. So do you have some positive colleague experiences too to share?
I mean, I worked for some of the best people in the world, I can't tell you. But I think the most positive experiences are actually about people that I worked with. My kind of gift, if you like, was where people understand what people would be good at in their roles. So as you know, I think there's always been a thing about leadership. That's the kind of only route to success in lots of organisations. And one of the organisations I worked for realised quite early on that technical routes are just as acceptable. So I was able to kind of recognise where people might be better in going down a slightly different route and have those conversations and help them move into another area. So one of the milestones for me was where I actually realised, having a conversation with somebody about being good at your job versus being great at your job. Wouldn't it be amazing to be great at your job? And there are people that I used to work with all over the place now that I see on LinkedIn doing things that they shine at, and that makes me very happy and proud from a career perspective. But I think the biggest thing that happened for me was in the customer space many years ago. I can't remember just how many, but a financial advisor wrote into the company to say they were looking to raise some money and looking for a donation from this company because one of their clients' son was terminally ill, and he'd been given effectively either go to this experimental treatment in Austria or there's no hope. And he needed, as it turned out, £400,000. Right. So our kind of head of whatever just sent it to me going, what can you do? And I just thought it would be really easy to just write a cheque. But something about that story resonated. So we decided to walk, cycle, row the distance to Austria and back to kind of be in the shoes of Ollie, as he was. And we did that, and we raised so much money, and then we started thinking about his brother's experience, and he was into the Beano, so we got him to be the editor of the Beano, and through about a year we did so many wonderful things and made their life a little bit better, and that whole organisation got behind it. I didn't have to do anything. The organisation took that on, and in the end we raised £80,000.
Oh,
so
wow.
That's my absolute career highlight.
Yeah.
And I'm still in touch with the family. Very sadly, Ollie passed away, but I'm still very close to the family. So
by giving all those experiences, you then enriched his experience of the whole thing as well.
Yeah, that was an honour and a privilege to do that. Very special.
Yeah.
Very
So
special.
when we think about it in all sorts of areas of our business, whether it's customers, whether it's colleagues, whether it's just people that reach out to us, there are all sorts of different experiences that we can be looking at, and we can be improving, which in turn will improve our business and returns and that sort of thing. Is that a general idea? Yeah.
You're delivering an experience, be it a customer experience or a colleague experience, whether you intend to or not. So it's much better to deliver a consistent and intentional experience that you're in charge of, you can manage and measure it, and you'll know, how do you know if you're doing a great job in that area if you don't manage and measure it? So if you get your customer experience right, the bottom line will speak for itself. Get your colleague experience right, and that just elevates everything because you don't have turnover of staff, you don't have absence, so many and more experienced colleagues deliver a better service because they're more experienced. So yeah, it all leads to a very happy outcome for the business, for the customer, for colleagues, if you can get it. I like to say, get it to sing as one. They all work independently of each other if that's the kind of way an organisation wants to go. But the magic happens when you do both.
Right. And we've recently worked together on customer experience within our Peace of Mind team at Warner Goodman, and you've been instrumental in getting feedback from our customers, both in person and through surveys and that sort of thing about their experiences. And it's been quite an eye-opener for me, really, because it's been about thinking about what we do from a customer's point of view, how they experience it. We obviously refer to them as clients, rather than constantly thinking about how we deliver it and how we put it out and what people should appreciate that we've put in front of them. Is it a common trap for employers to fall into, that they just view things how we're giving it rather than how it's received?
Yes, and this goes back to being consistent and intentional about the experience that you're delivering. If you think customer or client, and you think, well, what are their moments of truth, what matters to them, and you focus on those, then that's the right way forward. But I think they're always, like colleagues and customers, they're always very willing to share what they'd like, and they'll do it in a very constructive way, very solution orientated. So yeah, quite often that's what happens, and life gets in the way. You've got your sales figures, targets, all these things, day-to-day stuff, a problem, your emails get in the way of all that, and it is just carving out the time to focus on it, because if you do, it brings huge dividends. And I also think businesses, and I probably, without wishing to be critical of broader businesses, but I do think, as people were told, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. No, organisations are clearly not people, but I think they behave collectively as an entity. And I think if they adopted the 2 ears, 1 mouth approach to customer experience and colleague experience, I think they would move their journey. They'd row the boat faster, they'd get to where they want to be quicker.
Absolutely, and we've yet to find the feedback and hear the feedback from our own experience. But my approach to it is that I don't want it all to be positive. I want to hear some negative feedback, because if people feel that they're trusting the process enough to give us their honest feedback and give us some negative feedback, well, that's very positive. I'd much rather that than they voted with their feet and just went to another law firm. It's really valuable information and something that we can learn and grow from. So I'm really looking forward to seeing the feedback, hearing the feedback.
Yes. And I think it's important because you've we've structured the survey in a way to elicit constructive feedback. That's been a deliberate, intentional approach, and it's been great. There's been lots of, this is amazing, but it'd be even more amazing because people can give feedback in a really safe way that way, because you're stepping forward to ask for it.
And it's really valuable stuff that you just don't get offered up voluntarily. You do have to sort of go out and ask for it and make yourself become a little bit vulnerable and be open to that sort of response.
Yeah, but it's the opportunity of what you can do with it that's exciting.
Yes, exactly.
And not to get hung up on numbers. I think it's important to have numbers and look at numbers, because that's your benchmark, and you think about where you would want to move the dial, but that's as much as you should focus on numbers. They should improve. It's like focusing on what people have told you, and that's where the richness happens.
Absolutely. You've also introduced me to the concept of journey mapping. Journey mapping, for the benefit of the audience who maybe haven't journey mapped before. Can you just explain a little bit about what that is and how that benefits the business?
I think it's providing a framework to have a conversation and help people understand. Because in the world of customer experience, you want to try and get into your customer's shoes, because if you look at things with your business lens, you're never really going to get behind it. So by using journey mapping, you're identifying the moments of truth, those moments where a customer will have an emotional reaction to a service. So in your case, that might be coming on board. They've made a commitment. That's a moment. They've handed over some money, but also they are going to be working with you on an area that's highly sensitive for them. So that's they're going to have their documents reviewed. Again, that's a moment for them. That's quite a big moment, because you're going to pass comment on that. Your support from your advisors, again, that's going to be a moment that matters to clients. The events and renewals, and you talk about and you think about them in the way that these are the moments that matter to customers. Every company, even within Warner Goodman, that will look different by the different parts of the organisation. And I find that really fascinating. But if colleagues then understand those journeys and what sits underneath them, and that's what we've done, we've gone, well, what does that look like from a customer point of view? And very quickly we've identified, oh, actually, why do we do that? Because you've taken the time to sit back and have a look at it. Colleague experience is fascinating because that is the same regardless of industry, sector or geography.
Okay.
And I find that really interesting. You don't need to go through that process. So some of it's dialed up and dialed down, but essentially there are 7 moments in a colleague journey. There's the joining, and by joining I mean looking at a website, talking to friends. You might look at Indeed or Glassdoor, hopefully with a degree of caution, and that's part of that journey, that you're starting to have a reaction. Then you'll have your interviews and your onboarding potentially, or you might receive feedback that you've not been successful, but you might still want to work for that company. So that has to be done in a way that leaves the candidate feeling, yeah, I'd like to come back. Then you've got the joining, first 3 months. So you would have things like some organisations, I don't need to tell you, have probation, accreditation. Teachers, I find in the main, they don't have that. So that's not a thing, but they still have that kind of initial joining. There's pay and benefits. And it might surprise people to know that benefits for colleagues now are things like people talk to me about more than pay. There's the doing your job, having one-to-ones, team meetings, and just doing your job, IT and all that good stuff. There's change my role, career development, and that's huge at the moment, and career paths around that and training and all that good stuff. That comes in there. And then you have life events, which I know is something, we've spoken in the past about what drives some of the activity here. But that's how an organisation responds to something that's happening to somebody's life outside of work. Now, sometimes it might be a gentle bump, they just need time off, but sometimes it might be cataclysmic. And how the organisation responds to that is incredibly important and actually can make or break a relationship. And then you would have leave, and I've said to you before as well, I really believe in a positive, happy leaving experience. I think it's hugely important to try. Now, people leave for all sorts of reasons, and you're at the other end of that, but I still think that can be done with dignity, and it should be as easy as possible for the person receiving that experience. I think if you go into it with that, you will create a great experience, and people will talk about your organisation very positively. So it's providing these high-level moments to have conversations and a framework and a structure, so people don't go down rabbit holes when they're talking about something, because that's generally what happens. So it's very specific, and it really helps.
And as you say, it applies across all sectors, all businesses. Yep. It's all the same thing. I remember years ago going to I was very lucky to go to a business development sort of strategic thinking program in China. Wow. On the Great Wall. It was amazing. Wow. And they brought together about 25 businesses, all from across Hampshire and Reading and the Isle of Wight and all sorts of places. And they were all very, very different. So I was there as a law firm owner, but then there was somebody who manufactured contact lenses, somebody who imported fireplaces, somebody who recycled telephones, all sorts of different businesses. All of their people stories were exactly the same. They all had the same issues. And when we come to give our employment law advice, we work with all different sectors, and we see the same stories across the piece, because people experience things, as you say, in quite the same set of ways.
And I think that was a bit of an epiphany for me, and it kind of struck me that HR professionals move around industries really simply for that very reason, but I don't think it's necessarily been established that that's why, but that is why. I just think it's amazing, and it makes employee experience so much simpler to understand.
And so when you're thinking about employee experience, you would focus on each of these 7 areas of that journey that you've mapped. Yeah. And is that key, would you say, you talked before about transformation of culture and making culture change within a business. If you've got a business where you feel that you need to make culture change, is journey mapping a key to resolving that? I
would say so. I would say that's a great place to get a sense of the heartbeat of the organisation, what's working, what's not working. Because employee opinion surveys, I think a lot of companies think, well, we do that, we talk to our colleagues, but actually that's the questions they want to ask that may or may not be at the top of colleagues' minds. So by journey mapping, you're providing colleagues with a framework to talk about, for example, Pay and benefits is a great one to start with, because people they really don't go on about pay, but they will say the pension's great, or we get these benefits, and then somebody else go, we didn't know we got those benefits. So it's a great place to that's a great place to start. But then you give them the comfort to start talking about what is it like to work here? What are the frustrations? How easy is it for me as a colleague to be my best here? And it's amazing the difference it makes. So you then get a kind of almost a health check, a diagnostic of what's going on the ground. And I always recommend that you do that. You do your frontline colleagues and you take your frontline leaders and do that separately. I'm amazed. I mean, generally, I would only be going into organisations where there potentially might be some friction or whatever. But frontline leaders and colleagues generally have a very different perspective. And I think organisationally, it's important to understand that gap to close it. Because if you don't close that gap, you're constantly going to be having issues, I think, with turnover, retention, absence, and people not giving the discretionary effort. And I think most organisations need a level of discretionary effort of their colleagues these days.
And do you think those sorts of discussions need to be had by somebody independent outside of the business? Because in my experience, employees will tell you what they think you want to know. What do they think you want to know in order to progress their career? They won't necessarily tell you what they genuinely feel. Or maybe that's just a reflection of me, I don't know. Do you think bringing in somebody independent is the way to really facilitate that?
Well, it's a bit of a loaded question given that that's what I do now. And I was thinking back coming into this role, having been in the position myself, I think if you are new in role, you can do this yourself, because I think people will trust you and they will tell you. And I've certainly found that. If I'd gone in at the very beginning, I think after that, you're kind of, and it's no reflection on your own ability, I think you have become part of the furniture, and maybe people that have come in don't really know you. And so I think there's a huge merit in doing it independently. But it's not to say that it can't be done in-house. I just think it's really important that it's done. I think you will get a better outcome with independence. But I think the independent person has to be very clear that they're being sponsored by the business or whatever leader. Be very clear that the leader has asked for this and wants honesty and absolute truth about what's going on. And then you will get that, as long as it's done in a way where the feedback is delivered back to the person carefully and without divulging any disclosures about who may or may not have said something. And if people feel confident, and I found that and it's an absolute privilege to do that for organisations.
And if somebody's listening to this now thinking, oh, my business could do with a bit of that, I would be interested in getting under the skin of my staff or indeed understanding my customers' experience more. Are there any sort of top tips as to where to start, how to get going with this?
I would start, I mean, if it's colleague, I think both customers or colleagues, I think start with your front line, start with the people that are dealing directly with your customers. That's where I'd go first, because they will lift the lid and quite often give you, and we've had, some of the work we've done here, they'll give you some quick wins because it's there. Sometimes they've not had the chance to think about it, but you give them the space to talk. Solutions naturally come and disclosures come. Oh yeah, that happens. I haven't thought about that. And then you might say something to me and that will trigger something off. So I would always start at with the people closest to the customers and then work it back. But you'll always get some amazingly rich feedback talking to those people.
We certainly found with ours, so we did journey mapping, didn't we, to start with ours, and we certainly found there are things that we do that once somebody asks the question, why do you do that? Well, because we've always done it. That's the way it's always been done. Yeah. That's why we do it. Even though the business has evolved over time, the technologies we use have evolved over time. So, no, we've always done it that way. That's the way we do it. But, once you start to think about the whys and you get challenged by people, as you say, on the front line who are experiencing frustrations with the way that it's done, you start to think, well, why do we do it that way? And could we do it differently? And how might that benefit the customers or indeed for ourselves? So It was very interesting, certainly. We've also talked about journey mapping in the context of using it to help write policies and procedures, for example. And we had quite a good discussion around journey mapping in the context of menopause and talking to colleagues, because menopause is one of those things which, again, we talk about grandparents and parents. I don't suppose my mum discussed menopause with her work colleagues at any point. She certainly didn't discuss it with me either. As a daughter, it might be quite beneficial. So it's quite interesting to think about journey mapping in terms of how you write your procedures, because I think your approach, and well, perhaps you'll tell me, but is if you just write your policy and impose it on people, it's not really going to do any good. It has to be something that comes from dialogue.
Yeah, I believe, I think, I understand why some organisations might want to just pick a policy off a shelf and implement it, and it does tick a box and it doesn't require a great deal of effort. I'm a great believer in authenticity, and I think colleagues can sniff a tick the box exercise quite easily, and it doesn't engage them. On the menopause front, I think you need to establish what is the problem you're trying to, what is it you're trying to do. I think you need to go out and talk to colleagues about, don't impose solutions that they might not appreciate. I think I used an example where one company I was aware of decided to give 5 days a year off to women with menopause, just as without them having to have a conversation other than, I need a day off. But that company's, the managers were male. They're in their 20s, and I was just kind of thinking more, if we'd mapped that through, you might have thought, well, actually, talk to me about that, because that's a barrier to making that happen. So if you kind of go back to, and women didn't necessarily want that. And what I find through the journey mapping, because I then took actually my friends, and we'd never had a conversation either. So I did a lot of focus groups with my friends, and what they want is practical help. Access to specialist doctors, access to bespoke information. Not everyone has a problem. And this is the other thing. Some people sail through.
Absolutely.
Some people sail through, and that's absolutely fine and wonderful. But some people have massive challenges. Yeah. But if you then use the 7 moments of truth and look at it that way, you would then look at your web. So you would look at joy. You would look, what does it say on your website about menopause? Because somebody probably doesn't want to have that conversation at their interview, frankly. Now, I know you'll say they can't discriminate, but, they'd find a way, potentially, if they were worried. And then you look at joining. Now, what if they're going through the menopause? What if they've got having a brain fog day or whatever? So you start to talk to colleagues about the 7 moments of truth and what does that look like. One of my friends left a company because she just couldn't cope. And my most interesting thing that came out, I found really from a really practical point of view, and I was very fortunate to sell. I was a sell-through person. She said, doing the job, and several of my friends said this, they were taking coats to work. They were taking, and you're nodding here going,
yeah.
taking coats and changes of clothes to work for reasons that we won't go into, but I think it's self-evident. So she was saying, can companies just not have cream chairs?
Yeah.
And that's such a simple solution, isn't it? It's kind of like, oh my goodness, as a design principle, looking over there as a light coloured chair. So it's just things like that. What does doing the job look like? Going into a meeting room where you're not going to potentially have a situation which might be potentially embarrassing. So it was just really fascinating. But the group that I did were please don't tick a box. A number of them had apps and they were really good apps, but they hadn't been trained. They had no show and tell, how to use them, what was available, they didn't know. So the company had invested a lot of money and hadn't actually shown colleagues. So again, that just felt tick the box. And after the session, people, and I was just talking to one of my friends the other day, she went and did different things because of it, which was amazing. And I think you'd find that from a colleague perspective. So I think you need to understand what is it you're trying to do, talk to that population. But once you know what you want to do, you have to then talk to leaders about how to deliver that experience. And, a 24-year-old guy, and my friends' husbands, all that run businesses themselves, they would not want to have that conversation in the main. Not all of them, but
yeah.
So.
And I think even as women, I mean, I'm a great fan of Davina McCall and the whole kind of stuff that Davina's done on menopause and others before her. And she talks about the fact that there's something like 70 different symptoms, and all of us will have a different experience. So even women who are running businesses will find that they can make assumptions about people's menopauses that aren't actually going to be played out with their colleagues around them and that sort of thing. So I think it's not just a kind of male-female thing. The other thing I think is interesting is that obviously as part of our Peace of Mind service, we support employers. We will review their policies and procedures from an employment law compliance point of view. But the comment that you made earlier about what's the purpose of this policy, because yes, we can review and we can tell you that's not legally compliant, that might be discriminatory, you need to do this, you need to do that. But there's so much more to be gained from your procedures and from your policies that is more than just complying with the law, that is about actually enhancing your colleague experiences so that you then get payback from colleagues in terms of loyalty and productivity and all those sorts of things.
Yeah, it's defining the experience you want colleagues to have. You know, we spoke about this, you know, I'm a big believer in the power of three. So what 3 words do you want customers to experience? Because everybody can get behind that. And if you can then marry that with your colleague experience and have a similar thing, then test your policies against that and say, well, are they delivering on that? What is the experience we want colleagues to feel? And, you know, potentially talk about and advocate. And that just makes it a very different thing. Because if you just put in a policy, the chances of it being, and as you all know, is, you know, delivered or executed, for want of a better word, well and consistently by leaders is pretty slim, to be honest. And then you're in the territory of grievances.
Absolutely.
And tribunals. And I was always one to I would always tell my manager if I was doing something that was a bit off-piste, shall we say, and they would generally say, that's fine, but don't say anything about what you're doing. But I know, having come out of that, yes, that was great, but if there was another manager trying to do things by the book, that wasn't very fair on them and people they were working with. So I can see I've got different lens on that now.
And during your career, obviously, you've been employed by different types of businesses. You talked about retail, you talked about financial services. Yeah. You've seen the world from the eyes of an employee. You've been employed for a long time, obviously now independent. So, you know, without disclosing any confidences or disparaging your former employers, are there lessons that you think employers can learn from your sort of colleague experience, from what you've been through?
I think it's about listening. It's about providing safe places for listening appropriately at different levels and all the rest of it. I genuinely think listening is finding, I call them listening frameworks, and having different listening frameworks. I think even that on its own would be great. I was never given an exit interview at one company, and I find that quite frustrating, because even though, you know, say, you know, I've been made redundant, and I was delighted to be made redundant, but I think there's organisations fear exit interview feedback, I think, where they know they may be doing something that may not be popular with an individual. But for me, it was fine. I was delighted. I wouldn't be here today if that hadn't happened. But so I think it is all about creating listening opportunities and accepting that, and you need to accept that your way is not necessarily, you know, your way, the highway. But I think you do need to take on broad spectrum of...
And exiting from a business can come about for all sorts of reasons. It obviously, I get involved when it's something that involves a dismissal or something of that sort, but it could just be that somebody's career progression takes them somewhere else.
Absolutely.
And I think how somebody departs from a business, as you're sort of describing yourself, it's a little bit like that thing about, you know, watch out for the people on your way up, because you might see them again on the way back down. How you exit people from a business is very telling. We've definitely got people within our business who've been and come back, and they've only been able to go and come back and bring with them the experience from elsewhere because of the way they exited, because they left with dignity. They went off to do whatever it was they were going to do. I mean, we can even point just to our managing partner, who was with us and then went to work for another law firm and then came back with all the experience that he'd learnt there and is now managing partner here. And I think it's all about treating people with respect along the way. And then you never know what might be around the corner or what opportunities there might be when their talents might be engaged by you again, or not. But it's that dignity thing, isn't it?
I think it's having the intent to deliver that experience with dignity, with ease, and make it happy is probably the wrong word, but you can talk about happy leaving experience, but I think it's just so important. And these days, I don't know if you've heard of the concept of boomerang employees.
That's exactly it.
Yeah, that's it.
The
grass, and particularly after COVID, people went back and were worried about their jobs, so went to a different job, and then they'll come back. And I think that's really telling, and generate the different generations now. they're less tolerant of employers not treating them with respect and dignity, but they might go off and try somewhere else, and then they might come back again. And I think that's definitely a trend. And some recent work that I did, when I was talking to some colleagues in a big pharmaceutical company, they actually recognised they would be boomerang employees, so didn't want to leave because they knew they would end up coming back, which was quite interesting from an awareness point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously follow you on LinkedIn, and I see from LinkedIn you're a bit of the queen of the awards ceremonies these days. You seem to have been going out awards left, right and centre. You judge, I think, at the UK Customer Experience Awards and the UK Employee Experience Awards.
Yeah. I have in the past. I've entered them, I've judged, and this year I kind of hosted a session of that. So it was a privilege to see how that's coming on.
So can you give us some examples of what top businesses are doing in this area? The really good companies in these sorts of areas, what are they doing, and how do they win their awards?
So I saw some like keynote presentations which were amazing, and one of the kind of headlines was employers are the consumers of the workplace, which I think that really says it all, isn't it? You know, they're the consumers now, they're not just, production line. So the things that were working well is managing colleagues through change. And there's a huge number of stats out there about most companies, the colleague experience is not even on the kind of roadmap for their project management. So colleagues organisations that do change well and actually showing how the evolution of the colleague journey through change, that's, huge. Some of the stats are frightening about companies and what happens to colleagues through change, because there's that whole phrase, isn't it? There's nothing other than death, there's nothing more certain than change in the workplace. There was a lady who won 2 awards at the Employee Experience Award who was extraordinary, and she was all about well-being. It was more than just well-being. She was very caring, looking at what colleagues needed to be their very best self at work, and authentically so. To the point, and we spoke earlier about employee opinion surveys and asking questions, she had managed to ask the question, how much sleep the colleagues, so it was a company I think it was about 350, how much sleep they got. And she was really shocked to find it began with a 6. And she's like, that's terrible, that's absolutely terrible. So she brought in a sleep specialist and, provided, and these things don't have to cost a lot of money, but where she saw a need, she was providing solutions. So this is what I go back to, when you think about something, go back at what is the problem you're trying to solve here. She had colleagues who were caring for elderly parents, and she managed to find an app that could provide last minute care and all these things. I mean, she was extraordinary, and she won 2 awards. And I was watching her present, and the most telling thing for me was she had a team there, and she's been in the awards for a few times. She had never won gold. And everything she said, her team were like behind. They were like, yes, oh yes, and it was a joy to behold that, and that's everything. There's no reason why every organisation couldn't be like that if they wanted to be. But she was exceptionally special.
And what resonates with me, apart from the fact she's very caring, and I love all of the sort of stories she's told, is that sense of you told us something and we did something about it. Because doing this survey, whether it's customer experience survey or whether it's finding out what your colleagues, there's no point getting that information if you don't then do something with it.
No.
So I think you sort of said before, you've said and we've done is quite a good feedback. You need to do the survey, but then you need to feedback to people saying, thank you for that. You've told us this, and this is what we've done with it. This is what we've chosen to do to improve.
It's called closing the feedback loop. And I've seen on LinkedIn some people, customer experience is a kind of well-trodden path now. And I've seen people on LinkedIn saying it's such a cliche. But I think as long as you do it, and I think for organisations that like yourselves that are dipping your toe into the science, not that you've not been doing a great job, but you're dipping your toe into the kind of methodology and science, I think that's great. And I think clients will be delighted to hear back and go, because I think you've got an incredibly engaged group of clients, and I think they'll be delighted to hear back from you. Because I just think any client feedback is a cause for celebration. Absolutely.
So any final words of wisdom or encouragement for our audience if they're finding this all interesting and they want to do something about it? Any final tips?
I still go back to the 3 words. If you do nothing else but consciously think about your colleague or customer experience and put 3 words around that, I would always say easy. So do you make it easy for your colleagues or customers to do business with you, to be serviced by you, whatever it is? And think about that and just take a step back, maybe just an hour a week, just step back from it and start to think like in your customer's shoes, and do you make it easy? But I think then you pick your other 2 words that are potentially more appropriate for your own business. Valued customers comes up a lot. But I think that's the simplest and easiest thing to do. And I would really recommend asking customers. You don't have to do it. I mean, we all see these surveys that come through your email, don't you? Oh, you just came in. What do you think? If you're a smaller business, you probably just want to do that once a year, and that's a brand survey. And maybe just once a year, just go out and ask the question. And, there'll always be something you can do to make your business even better, no matter how amazing it already is.
That's a good theme to end on, isn't it? There's always something you can do to make it better.
Yeah.
I like the sound of that.
Yeah.
So, last things on the agenda is our audience-sourced question.
Oh,
so what would the audience want to know from you? So we've got an envelope here, Christina, if I can ask you to read out your question. And
I don't have my glasses. Will I be able to read it? No.
Do you want me to read it for you?
Yeah, could you? Would you mind? Optically challenged.
So the audience-sourced question, I've got my glasses.
Thank you, I should have bought mine.
If you weren't running this business and if money was no barrier, what other business would you like to run?
That's a really good question. I do not have many skills. This is my thing. Like customer and colleague is my passion and love in life. My youngest son is dyslexic, quite severely dyslexic, and we spoke when he was at school quite extensively about. I mean, he had readers, he had all sorts of support for exams and all the rest of it. But when he then had to do his revision, so the bit between school and actually sitting the exam, the support and help was there. The bit in the middle, nothing. So how was he ever supposed to revise in a way that he was actually going to be successful? So I think I would have the skills to kind of create a company, whereas with people like him providing the subject matter expert support, but kind of fill that vacuum, because I think there's still a massive gap for this. I was talking to my friend the other day, and the same sort of thing, like there's a big black hole, and I think that's really
you'd
sad.
think with all the homeschooling we've had, with all the technology we now tap into, with the Zoom and Teams and all that kind of stuff, that they could have people with them all the way through that journey.
Or some form of revision, or video. He would have really welcomed videos. Somebody could have done videos. And again, dyslexic people really appreciate certain fonts, certain colour backgrounds. So I think it's still such a big gap, and it makes me very sad that that's still an issue. And I think even for employers aren't necessarily great there. So I would like to set up a company to help students fill that little gap in their study calendar. Yeah.
Well, if anyone out there in the audience is planning to do that, Christina's your woman. But if not, if you're planning your journey mapping, or if you're thinking about customer or colleague experience, then do please get in touch. How can people get hold of you, Christina?
They can get hold of me quite simply, christina@thecolleague.co.uk.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure talking, and we'll carry on our conversation elsewhere, I'm sure.
We will. Thank you, Sarah. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode. I hope you found it insightful and empowering. To stay connected, why not hit the subscribe button? Or if you think your friends might be interested, why not rate us as a 5? To be first to know about upcoming episodes, follow us on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram and LinkedIn, where you'll find us at Warner Goodman LLP, or follow us on YouTube, where our episodes are at Piece of Pod. Thank you again. Until next time.